Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again, this time going way back to 2024, May 3rd to be exact, as we cover Bear McCreary's The Singularity. And I am particularly excited about this one because it is one of the few albums that I had never heard about, let alone listened to. And so this is going to be a very, very interesting discussion for many, many reasons. But before we talk all things Bear McCreary, how are you, my friend?
Very good, very good. I wanted to, first of all, thank Nick for his patience because he did request this a long time ago, and we kind of waited a while because it's a big album, and so we wanted to make sure that we gave it the time that it deserved, and I'm glad that we did because this was a really fascinating journey, I will say.
Yeah, no doubt about that, and there's a lot to dive into here. As I suspect most people that are listening to this podcast, most of our regular listeners probably have not heard of this album, may not be familiar with this artist who is more famous for many other things than this album. But when you look at the guests that are on here and the diversity of songs, it is going to be a really, really interesting chat. But a few things I wanted to just mention before we kind of dive right into it. 3 albums in particular that really caught my ear this week. The first is from the UK band Sylosis. Their new album is finally out, and it is a banger. It's called The New Flesh. It's out on Nuclear Blast Records. It's their first album in 3 years. Really solid, hard-hitting metal, death metal, melodic death metal, all rolled into one nice package. Really, really good album, worth checking out. 2 other albums I'd be remiss not to mention. Another UK band called Tailgunner, their new album Midnight Blitz, shades of old Iron Maiden and Judas Priest there. If you're into those styles, they are keeping that torch alive, to say the least. And finally, a band that is new to me, their second full-length album, the first in 8 years. The album is called Dreamery. The album or band is called Flower Leaf. I believe they are a hybrid Brazilian and German band with awesome female-fronted vocals. Just really, really good stuff. I was not expecting the power and intensity out of this album that we got, but nonetheless, it's something I'm going to go back to. I think it's something in particular that you might enjoy. So I just wanted to mention those 3 albums. Did anything catch your ear this week that was worth a mention?
I will mention in particular the new Love Bites album, which was kind of, I want to say it was like dropped as a surprise because it was just on iTunes one morning, and I think that the physical copy of the album is not actually being released until May, but you can listen to it digitally, and I have listened to it twice now, and it's fantastic. The album's called Outstanding Power, and I think that it's aptly named because I just feel like this band is so good, like just so talented, and it's. I was listening to the album earlier, and like, you know, every person in the band, I think, has a chance to shine. Like you hear the bass lines and you hear the drum fills and the guitar solos and great vocals. Just a really impressive group. This all female Japanese power metal band. So I highly recommend, if you have enjoyed their previous material, this won't steer you wrong. And if you're not familiar with them and you're a power metal fan, you owe it to yourself to give it a listen. I would be very surprised if this is not on my list at the end of the year.
Nice. So lots to check out. Obviously, point you to our Spotify, where we post all of our monthly and sometimes more frequent playlists. Get a sense of what we're listening to and some of the stuff that we do not mention, but just some of the stuff that's caught our ear as of late. And now, as we turn to this Bear McCreary album, I'm going to start with a threshold question. Had you ever heard of this gentleman before we covered this album and before it was requested, or was this a brand new name for you? Because when we get into a brief history of the bio and who this person is, it's remarkable that I had never heard of him prior to the request coming in from Nick.
I was going to ask you if you were familiar with any of the soundtracks that he is, worked on in the past. I had not heard of him, but then when I looked at his credits, I was like, oh, I've seen some of this stuff. Yes. In particular, The Walking Dead and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were two shows that I pretty much watched, I think, every episode of. But he's also really well known for doing Battlestar Galactica, Eureka, Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Shout out to Mike.
I remember really enjoying the Lord of the Rings of Power soundtrack. He did all 16 of those episodes. That's just the movies, right? It doesn't even count some of the films and video games he's done. I bring this up because, by way of background, Bear McCreary is a composer who's done film, television, games, nominated for 6 Emmy Awards. He's won a Primetime Emmy. Again, I paint this picture because this is not the typical discussion that we have about a band who has, that with a history or a debut album. This is a Hollywood composer who, not surprisingly, is clearly a metal fan. Why? Because this is undeniably a double CD metal album with elements of the film scoring and whatnot. And we'll get into that. But this is a metal album with guests that you've heard of and songs that neatly fit into several categories and are adjacent to stuff that we've covered at one point or another in terms of genre, I think. But I had never heard of him. I've known his work. I just didn't know who he was. And now that I have, I don't think I'll watch any of these shows the same way because of, spending quite some time with this album, which to your point is rather dense. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's just, it's not a 40-minute album. This is 2 full discs of music, but which was rather catchy and easy to digest. It was just a lot of it.
Did you find the very first time that you listened to this that it was almost overwhelming? I was overwhelmed the first time, and the second time I listened to it, I decided to take a break in between the first and second disc and listen to something else, and then listen to the second half later in the day. I found that really let me concentrate more on each disc, and then each subsequent listen, I listened to it in full. And I think that kind of helped me piece it together in my own head. And then I felt like it clicked more. It's definitely not a listen to it once and put it away experience, because not just the music, every song just having its own almost genre bending feel to it. But there's also so much happening in the lyrics and the thematics and the parallelism with the graphic novel that was written to go along with this. This will be probably my second experience after the last Arion album of reading a graphic novel while listening to an album, and it's an interesting exercise because I feel like my thoughts on what the album meant thematically changed very much after reading the graphic novel. And it's an easy read. It's 135 pages or so, but because it's, mostly visuals and not a ton of dialogue, it took me about 20-25 minutes to read the whole thing. And it's interesting because I feel like it does kind of end in a one of those ways where it's kind of like you decide how, what happens. And I'll get into that as we get towards the end of it. But I mean, this was a really all in experience of all of I feel like it was just not just listening to music, but really digging into just everything. And the list of people that contributed to this album is super impressive. Not just musicians, but like, actors that did some of the spoken word parts that, some of which are pulled directly from the graphic novel, or the graphic novel pulled it directly from, I don't know what the order that these things were created. Some voices that you may recognize. There was one that I knew immediately.
There were a few that I picked up pretty fast, and we'll get into those just because I think it's worth a mention for those tracks. But to your point, I agree. I found it so all over the place with the first listen. Not bad. I enjoyed the first listen, but I didn't know what was happening. And then I think my second listen, I was listening with Jen in the car when we were taking a road trip up to Rhode Island. And she was like, what is going on? Every track sounds so different, but she liked it. And I was like pleasantly surprised because there's an accessibility here that if you go in with a semi-open mind, I think you'll find it a rather accessible album. But when you broke it up into two separate listens in close proximity, it was better than listening to it straight through, at least early on, because I just typically don't have 2 hours to sit there and listen to music. I wish I did. I don't. So I have to bifurcate it in some way, shape, or form. But before we start getting into the tracks, and I think we did a nice job with kind of the background here, I want to just read a blurb from Nick, who had recommended this album. And the reason for it is because his perspective is rather unique. I should note, and I hope I'm not revealing trade secrets here, Bear McCreary, is a graduate of the USC Thornton School of Music, as is Nick, who requested this. So there's a kinship there, although I don't think I know they didn't go to school together, but I say that because they both have a broader view of the music industry than I think you and I do. So let me just get into it. He said,
before you read his blurb, I just want to point out to those who are not aware, Nick is an old friend of both of ours. We went to high school together, and he was along. He was along for the ride on our journey to become fans of heavy metal in high school. And I think that, like, when everybody went off to college, everyone kind of just went their own way as far as what they were listening to. We weren't, I don't think, influencing each other as much as we were in high school. So, like, I feel like everyone just kind of went off, like, splintered into different directions. Some people listened to more music than others. Some people made music, like Nick and our friend Ryan as well. And, Brian played guitar, and it's just interesting. I think that because we weren't, like, around each other all the time, like, not everyone kept watching wrestling, and not everybody listened to metal. Even myself, I've said it many times, like, I didn't listen to metal nearly as much. Our paths kind of reconverged thanks to Prog Power, and now especially through this podcast. So I just wanted to provide just a little background on how we know Nick, and just so there's that part of it as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that. He says, as much as I love metal and have for decades, my love for music from movies, television shows, and video games has been with me from as early as I can remember. When I heard that Bear McCreary, who I've been a fan of as a film and TV composer going back to Battlestar Galactica, had created a metal album, I was thrilled. I work professionally as an orchestrator for film, TV, and video game music, and the arrival of this album was an exciting opportunity for two of my musical worlds to collide. Before I had finished my first listen, I knew I'd be asking you guys to cover it on a future episode. When someone hears that a film composer has released a metal album, there may be some early assumptions that it would essentially be a film score with a metal band pasted on top, similar how Metallica with S&M and Dream Theater has done with their orchestral concerts, which I enjoyed both, but it was really just pasted an orchestra on top of music that wasn't really written with the orchestration in mind. That is not the case at all for this album. The Singularity is a metal album through and through, and at times a heavy and harsh one at that. It spans a huge range of styles, and I truly believe there's something on this album for everyone, from fans of hard rock and prog rock / metal to brutal riffs and harsh lyrics to hip-hop inspired rap and scat, all the way to truly beautiful orchestral moments and vocal performances. Bear writes for the entire palette at his disposal, knowing when to use certain tools and when to leave out others. The orchestral moments pair with the band in an organic way to create a whole where there can't be, to create an organic way to create a whole where one can't live without the other, all backed by world-class performances, the benefit of Hollywood-level production and truly masterful mixing to create a package that, in my opinion, is truly unique in the world of metal. As I've listened to more in the last few weeks and find the experience as a whole resonates more than the individual parts, similar to my feelings about albums like DT's Seen from a Memory. I don't think of it as an individual tracks as much, but some of the highlights for me are the way in which it kicks off with a bang on Incinerator, the infectious chorus on Redshift, the earworm Tatagrimi with its unique ethnic percussion, and the epic end of Tomorrow as the album nears closure. I will say some of those happen to be my favorites as well. We'll get into that in a little bit. Despite all of that, my track of the week is Type 3. Rufus Wainwright is one of those singers whose voice and style is instantly recognizable and unmistakable. His lifting singing soars on this track, and above lush orchestration with a melody that sticks with you all the way to its return in the album on Yellow Eyes. The track is a welcome break from the onslaught that comes before and after, and I wanted to make sure it got some airtime around whatever other tracks the guys choose to highlight. I hope this episode sheds light on an album for many people who have missed its release and can't wait to hear Chris and Justin's take. Thanks for indulging me with this one, gents. So a little bit lengthy, but I felt it was extremely important for the context, and I will do my best not to repeat some of those things, although my analysis was similar to Nick's. With that said, I think we've painted a nice background for what this is and what this is not. Shall we get into it?
Oh, I thought we were done after listening to what Nick said. I'm going to have a hard time following that, but yeah, we'll attempt.
Let's do our best, shall we? This is a 2 CD album, so we'll kick off with the first disc, obviously. It starts off with a song aptly entitled Overture, and again, you're talking about movie score quality for the minute or so that this track goes on, with some really spooky sound effects. It comes to a great crescendo with brass instruments, and kind of paves the way for the orchestration that's going to permeate this disc. But it gives you a false sense of hope if you think this is just a film score, because the metal hits hard with Incinerator, the first track.
Agreed. You can hear some of it's almost like a prelude to the first full-length track. But it's not super long, just about a minute just to get things rolling. And then we're off and running with a real, probably one of the heaviest tracks on the entire album, Incinerator, featuring System of a Down's Serj Tankian. This is a song that I didn't really like that much at first, and then the more I listened to it, the more it just grew and grew and grew on me. And I feel like Serj Tankian was a really, really good choice to do the vocals on this track. He has almost like this otherworldly sound to his vocals, which I think really just fit really well here. But also like just heavy guitars and it's kind of amazing that that somebody who to my knowledge had not made metal music or a metal album before, this is a hell of a debut with this track. Like, you would think that he was writing metal songs for decades, but I guess when you're that accomplished of a composer and that kind of music you've been a fan of it and it's inspired you, it probably, I'm guessing, is not that hard to translate it when you have that sort of skill, which I will never know what that's like. I'm very envious. You can only
dare to dream, right?
Yeah, I'm very envious of people who have that skill, honestly. But I thought this was a really awesome way to kick things off. I saw a cool little blurb that from the AmericanSongwriter.com, where it just said Incinerator feels like a car on fire screaming down the highway. So
that's awesome.
I think that's a pretty good description.
that initial riff is about as metal as it gets. So if there's any confusion as to what kind of an album this is, that riff, I think, gives it away. And although I was never a fan of System of a Down, I appreciate Serge's vocals. And I'll tell you something odd to me. I always compared him to, and maybe I'm crazy because they don't sound alike, but there's something about the inflection in their voice that I always thought he reminded me of Daniel Gildenlow and his approach with some of those early Pain of Salvation albums. And so I always appreciated the vocals and even some of the System of a Down music, although I would not, again, consider myself a fan. What immediately impressed me about this track was the layers to it. And that is something that I'm not going to keep repeating. I'll just say that every track is so layered and so dense and speaks as to the production value, which is maybe the best that I've ever heard for a metal album. That's how great the production is. It is big budget stuff here, and it sounds every bit as impressive as anything I've ever heard. This is a very proggy tune, especially that bridge, and I thought it was a good hook from the start. I actually rather enjoyed this tune right away. And I thought that Event at the Horizon, the next tune, was like a really suitable follow-up as well, but again, in a completely different direction. Much more mellow, has a lot of Middle Eastern vibes to it, as some of these tracks have some real ethnic flavor. So I heard some Orphan Land on this track, at least until that riff came in. And then that first vocal scream on Event at the Horizon, my God, I mean, if there was any doubt, S.J. Jones, who I think sings on this track, does a phenomenal job, especially right out of the box. It reminds me of like Spirit Box and that sort of a vibe. Little bit of rap and metalcore thing going on. Undeniably heavy, just very powerful. Love the melodic bridge, and I feel like they're off to a 2-for-2 start on tracks that could not sound any different.
Yeah, I had to look up S.J. Jones, but apparently she is a Grammy-featured rock, pop, and metal producer, songwriter, and entrepreneur, born in Durban, South Africa, and based in Southern California.
Apparently a hell of a singer. Who knew?
Yeah, no joke. She would not be out of place, singing for any metal band, honestly. I'm not going to go like too in depth into the story. I think that it's something that really should be experienced individually, and everyone, I think, might get their own sense of what it means. But the overarching story that's happening here is that there's this being who, with each song, is being reborn and is starting a new life. And the internal battle that the protagonist has is that he's starting to realize that at the end of each of these lives, there's this other being that he keeps seeing, and he has this internal struggle of like, do I want to go to war with this being who's causing me so much pain, because they're the reason why I have so much grief and loss every time I die and my world is torn apart, and then I am reborn and have to start all over again. And that's why I think the beginning of the album has so much like kind of angst to it, especially these first two tracks. It's almost like he's waking up in his new life and is immediately like going to war with this other being. And so just to put it, briefly, the entire album is like this journey the protagonist goes through. And if you read the graphic novel, you'll start to realize that he has to make a choice at the end. Like, is he going to destroy, the multiverse that he's kind of at the forefront of, or is he going to accept it and kind of pass on, the multiverse to the next person who's ready to take it over? It's kind of what I took from it. And so I won't like touch too much on that going forward, but just kind of know that like each song represents another life that this protagonist is experiencing.
Nice, well said. And again, I appreciate the fact I've not read the story yet, but I have it queued up. I wanted to read. I had every intention, but they got away from me. So I will. I'm actually going to do it after we're done because I'm looking forward to it, just kind of immersing myself in the story. But as we forge ahead here to Redshift, the next track, I immediately thought you were going to love this tune. And so I have a hunch it might be your song of the week. I want to get into it, but am I right? Because the video game elements here and the proggy elements, I feel like is just you to a T. I have a lot more thoughts on it, but am I right? Do you love this one?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Actually, there are a handful of tracks that I really, really like on this album, and so
I don't want to steal your thunder, but I know you well
enough.
No, you were going to love this one. It's
all good. This one, though, it's just that the combination of like the chip tune sound at the beginning. But then the actual, like, once the song gets going, it has kind of like an alt rock meets metal vibe to it. Brendan McCreary, who's Bear's brother, does the vocals on this track, and we'll hear him throughout the album. He reminds me a bit of the vocalist from Muse, who I want to actually look up his name so I don't sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, but
Matthew Bellamy.
Yes, thank you. Muse is a band I've always really enjoyed, and I find that his vocals are kind of akin to that. But this is just another like really high energy song that I like. There's like a point where it kind of quiets down and you get that chiptune sound comes back in again, and it's really almost like this. It's interesting because it sounds futuristic, but at the same time it sounds old, because if you're a fan of like old video games like we are, you think of an 8-bit or maybe even like before 8-bit, much like Machine Supremacy would use like the Commodore 64 sound system to do some of their electronic elements. But this is just a beautiful marriage of a lot of things that I enjoy: heavy metal, like alternative rock, and chiptunes. So yeah, you really did hit the nail on the head with this one. Why don't we give it a quick listen, and then I really am curious to hear what you have to say about it. But this is Redshift.
Came a dream and took all that you had to give it. It came alive and it lashed out and it's so distinctive. But it's great, it's the pain that keeps the engine driven. Right after that, you're so good back now. And I bet you played the victim, but you were wrong. And I bet you had a vision until it's gone. I bet things seem just as sweet as they could be, but right now, the truth is about to break out. Spinning faster, empty mirrors. Always farther, never nearer. Fading colors shift to red. I'm reaching out as pitch black spreads.
That was Redshift, Chris's song of the week, and that intro with that chiptune sound, I had a feeling this was going to be high on your list, and it's a very proggy tune with some really unique vocals. It was like this blend of like Michael Jackson and Machine Supremacy, who you mentioned, and this probably is my favorite tune so far. Really catchy with a chorus that is infectiously catchy, but so emotional. And I love the interplay between those gaming chiptune sounds and the guitar themselves. A really great track. And ironically, the track that Nick had picked out, Type 3, featuring Rufus Wainwright, of all people, was the next track. And this was another Song of the Week candidate for me as well. I didn't choose it, but it probably in my top 3 or 4. I think this tune is absolutely incredible. An infectious melody, but at the same time, because of Rufus Wainwright's vocal delivery, it allows that melody to breathe, and it's not so fast that you don't have a chance to kind of appreciate what the track is about. And What I also love about it is that it's got this slow, dirty guitar tone, which complements the vocals so well. And I thought the solos on this were great. And again, you talk about orchestration that's not merely there as layered on top, but it was clearly the song was made with the orchestration in mind. I loved it with the first listen. I loved it even more with each listen. And as I play it back now, I almost wonder why it's not my song of the week as well. But I know that there's other amazing stuff to come.
Yeah. To echo what Nick had said earlier, like the fact that the orchestrations were kind of the basis for everything else, and that's what this album was written for. This is like one of those songs that I think really drives that point home. And man, the production on this album is like a really just A+, like professionally super well done, because there's so many things happening and there's so many types of music, and this is a really good example of the guitar, that heavy metal guitar meets the symphonic orchestra, and it really marries itself quite well, I think. I'll pull this again. This is another quote from AmericanSongwriter.com. Type 3 is synth and strings heavy in the beginning, but shifts into shreddy guitar near the middle. Wainwright's vocals are tinged with reverb, which gives his voice a desperate quality. Overall, the composition is chill-inducing, especially when Wainwright exclaims, "I'll never be the same," over a backdrop of grungy guitar and strings. And Bear McCreary added his own comments about this track. Perhaps the most surprising guest on the Singularity is Rufus Wainwright. I've always adored how his sonorous voice floats above brilliant arrangements with artful lyrics. I never thought I'd hear Rufus's operatic tenor tone soar above a bombastic heavy metal track. However, I sent him a few tracks and I was thrilled when he wanted to sing Type 3. Rufus recognized in the track an evocatively operatic melody with a tragic sadness in the lyrics he knew he could convey. He brought intense, heartfelt longing to the choruses. Can't turn away from you. I am grateful Rufus took a chance with me and sang in a genre he had never before. The result is truly unique. And I mean, no arguments here. It fits perfectly.
And some people's talent transcend the genres. And I feel like if you made him the front man for virtually any band that has melodic vocals, and I'm not talking about soaring in a Michael Kiske way, but like soaring, powerful vocals, almost like a Falconer type of vibe, I feel like he would hit it out of the park and just crush whatever you put in front of him. This is a remarkable track. I will make a point to post it in some way, shape, or form because people need to hear it. It's that good. And so for me, it was just 2 home runs in a row. And then you transition to Blue Eyes, which is really a spoken word track featuring Lee Pace. And I didn't know who Lee Pace was, but apparently he's an actor who starred in several films, television shows, theater. He was in Guardians of the Galaxy, so maybe I've seen his work. I just didn't realize it, and I didn't recognize the voice. But it's really just a kind of a transitional piece before the next tune.
Yeah, and just the words are pulled or vice versa from the graphic novel, and it's just kind of like the protagonist talking about how many ways that he's died in all of these, different lives that he's led. So that's kind of how it ties into the story. Blue Eyes is the protagonist.
There you go. And the next proper track is Antikythera Mechanism. I think I actually got that right. Featuring Raya Yarbrough, who's Bear's wife. And what's interesting about this, for several reasons, is that you can tell that he's not only reaching out to some huge names, and there's others to come, but he's become a family affair with his brother and his wife participating. And Bear's wife on this track does a phenomenal job. And I say that because this song has some really cool sound effects, but the vocals and the nature of the song is more like jazz lounge than it is anything else. Again, very different from anything that's come before it. And so I hear a lot of like Cammy from Oceans of Slumber, that sort of a vibe. Jazzy yet big time movie score feel with the orchestration behind it. It's slightly repetitive, but the song builds nicely from the beginning to the end, and it's just so different from the tracks that have come before it.
This was one of my favorite tracks on the album, very nearly my song of the week, because the combination of Raya's just beautiful vocals with the sweeping orchestral passages, and then just a really emotional guitar solo. Like I got like Avatarium vibes from this, like almost doomy sort of vibe, but with, like you said, like this really soulful jazzy vocal, really, really outstanding tune. And I think is really like the first track, I think, that stands out for being a little bit more subdued and understated in a good way. Like, you can't have every song be a face melter, and I think this is a nice break from how heavy everything's been up to this point. But man, what a wonderful track. There's a quick overview I saw on Google about her that just says, for several years, LA-born songwriter, vocalist, musician Rhea Yarbrough has been captivating West Coast audiences with a mesmerizing blend of jazz, pop, rhythm and blues, Latin, and much more. So I'm happy to know that who she is now, because this is a really killer tune. I like this one a lot.
Nice. Again, is moving ahead here, the next track, The Automaton's Heart, the sound effects on this, even just from the start, are unlike anything I've ever heard. And if you are going to listen to this album, strongly suggest you invest in a decent pair of headphones and listen, because it really comes to light on a track like this. It is the bass lines on this tune are fantastic, and it's this blend of like alternative rock, like a heavier Weezer or Nirvana, with a proggy bend to it. And the vocals fit the music absolutely perfectly. Brendan McCreary back doing the vocals. I know you said Muse. I can certainly hear it on this track as well. But the instrumental section here may as well be on a Rush album. That's how prominent it was to me. But it was like blending multiple eras of Rush. It was like that late 80s, early 90s Rush with what they were kind of doing in the 2000s. Just a blend of styles, but a lot of Rush there. And it was really an interesting song, even though I don't say it was my favorite. I thought it was really intriguing.
Have you ever seen one of those videos where somebody takes a bunch of hard drives and programs them so that it actually plays a song that you would recognize, but using the hard drive's mechanism as
that sounds fascinating. Is that what this sounds like?
That's what the beginning of this track reminds me of. I would be surprised if that's not what they did to create that sound, or it almost reminds me of like a dot matrix printer from back in the day, the pre-laser printer days. But the way that this song starts out, where it's just kind of like that, those quick, drum hits, and that is very Muse to me before the song kind of kicks in. And again, I feel like this, at least so far, the songs that Brendan McCreary have sang on do have a little bit more of an alt rock vibe, even though I think the guitar work is more in the metal realm. But I feel like the melodies and the singing has more of an alt rock kind of vibe to it. But this is another cool tune. I think that really, like, I can't think of any two songs on this album that sound really similar to one another. Every song really has a unique kind of sound to it.
What did you think about Industrial Revolution, the next one?
Another like kind of weird one that I'm trying to like formulate my my thoughts on this. It also kind of reminded me of like something from the early 90s, like alt rock kind of era. I I don't know. Maybe I'm going to pass this one on to you. It's definitely a kind of a different song. It has a very deliberate pace to it, and interesting kind of. I feel like the vocals kind of have that like that sound, like almost like that. I don't know if it's like some sort of modulation to it. I don't know. I had a hard time kind of just like thinking about what I wanted to say about this one. What were your thoughts?
You're not alone, and I'm going to give it a shot. And I'm not saying I'm right, but I have a kind of a unique take on this song. There's this shroud of mystery behind this song, especially at the beginning. So it is almost like a modern detective vibe or a detective story, with just like this deliberate but offbeat quirkiness to it. I can't really describe it, but there's a shroud of mystery there, and I liken that to, again, like a detective. The vocalist Astru Sierra reminds me a lot of Daniel Gildenlow, and the song itself does too. It's almost like a new era of Pain of Salvation. I love this song. I thought it was dripping with melody and curiosity, but when it was done, and I kind of realized this with the last listen, because I don't know that I would have said this, but it's like a touch of Alice in Chains with a dash of Mamireth. And I feel like if you put that together with a Pain of Salvation progginess to it, that is this tune, and it's fantastic. I would love to see something like this live. There's certain songs on this album that I think lend itself to a live setting. This is one of them.
Yeah, definitely get like the prog vibes on this one for sure. It's an interesting track, and again, unlike anything we've heard up to this point, and we'll hear the rest of the way.
And then we move ahead to Tatarigami, and this one is another track that features Brendan McCreary, although this one has much more of an ethnic tribal sound to it, a lot less alternative. I hear the sitar amongst other instruments, and it's really aggressive, really dirty. And because of the percussion, I hear Sepultura on this track. Again, not that it's as heavy as a Sepultura tune. It's not a thrash song, but the percussion reminds me of that Brazilian, almost Angra or Sepultura vibe. The verses are a little straightforward, but Brendan's vocals have a chance to shine, but it builds nicely to the chorus, and you can't help but kind of sway to the beat. This was the other track that I said, if I was going to hear this live, this would be great. And I feel like the composer side of Bear McCreary comes out on this track as well. It's just a really solid composition.
There's a lot of really cool folk elements throughout this album, and I think this is one of the tracks that you start to hear that kind of shine through, and you're going to hear it even more on the next track. But this one's just a really straightforward banger, I feel like, just like you said, though, with like some of that more tribal drum type of sound. Like you can almost picture like almost like a tribal group like dancing around a fire or whatever, but then like the metal comes in and like it's like a heavy metal tribe of some sort. But yeah, it's a really cool tune. I definitely agree with you that it has some of that kind of Brazilian folk metal sound to it. Cool track. And again, I enjoy Brendan McCreary's vocals quite a bit. Just another really good tune.
We almost always do not talk about the album in any detail or really any measure prior to recording, because we want to get an honest reaction about it. And that's something we've done since day one. You did mention briefly the singer on the next track because he's so fascinating that it was like we had to just talk about it in advance. I am going to absolutely butcher Griogailori's name. It's a Scottish name. And the next track on the album is called Exiles, and it also features Billy Boyd from Lord of the Rings. What do you make of this track? It is truly unlike anything I've ever heard.
I have to just start by saying that this vocalist blew me away. He's a Scottish Gaelic singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, recording artist, and he is it's one of the few musicians who can speak and perform in a mainland Gaelic dialect rather than the standard Hebridean Gaelic. According to Wikipedia, clearly I did not come up with this on my own. But the combination of like folk, like that Scottish Gaelic folk sound mixed with like a hip hop kind of beat, and like with rapping in Gaelic, and then with like a really just catchy chorus. Like this is like just such a unique, cool song. There's like the chorus in the background. Like this is a really fascinating tune. I was blown away by the talent of this guy, Gregor. I don't think I've ever heard like a Gaelic rap before. So cross that one off the list, because that was just super, super cool. I really like this track a lot.
The bagpipes at the beginning automatically had me curious as to what was going to happen, because I don't think I've ever heard bagpipes in metal really happen. But then even the production of the drum sounds, which is that traditional Irish or Scottish drum sound, which I love. You hear it during like a St. Patrick's Day parade or something like that. And then when you mix that with the riff, it's one of the greatest sounds I've ever heard. And I'm not being sarcastic when I say that. I've never heard anything like this track. And then those Scottish rap, almost like he's telling you a story, complement the music perfectly. You can feel the emotion in this song, and it has been stuck in my head since the first listen. I've never heard anything like it, but I'm totally there for it. I felt it was absolutely magical. And I'm not sure I'll ever hear anything like this again. Like this might be a one and done in terms of genre and blending of styles. It's my song of the week just because of how unique it is. So let's give Exiles a listen, and then we'll come back and finish out side A.
In the 90s I was there to the crises of a century or more. A language beaten from the tongues of our young and our heroes unsung, with the past they ignore. Gaelic Wúchar, Cainch Mawoise, roots deep down entwined into the core. The heart and soul of the land they stole, a way to control what we were told from before. Numa Karawa, Tfruche Yaraknach, Glefiro Galach, Namuche Garawach, Beklichen Fulach. Na hooligan marahug and drochert genan er bishin Orston and Sharavak. And then the people were exiled for textiles, lies and empire set fire to shame. The how ben ich dawa my haupt, der ich na mount der felt, ach sig and shower get karam fame. Can you hear the voices speak out so many generations on? Can you hear the truth now? How they stole our tongue and made us feel so wrong. You can hear the music when the piper plays or when I sing my song. But will you hear the message of how they made it feel like we don't belong? Written out of history, Scotland.
That was Exiles. If you don't believe my description, give it a listen and then tell me I'm wrong. Midnight Sun closes out side one of this album, and this is a really anthemic tune that kind of picks up where the last song left off in many ways. I don't know how, but somehow Brendan McCreary does his best impression, or kind of just, it's a smooth transition from the last track to this one. It has some folky elements for sure, similar structure and cadence in many respects. Love the production on this tune, and I thought it was a solid way to close out the disc. There are some really solid bass lines that kind of jump out on this one, and just, I'll be honest, I do prefer side A of the album. There's some real experimental stuff on side B that I enjoy, but side A of this album is fantastic. And so, not that I don't want to talk about the rest, but I really love what I heard so far.
Yeah, agreed 100%. I think I prefer side one also, or disc one. This was a song that I think it kind of starts out like, just like whatever, but that I feel like it really picks up with the orchestrations around halfway through, and then I think it finishes off really strong. I'm trying to put my finger on what like instrument I'm hearing. It's definitely not. I don't know. It sounds kind of like a bagpipe, but a little bit less of that like kind of sharp kind of sound that a bagpipe has that almost makes you wince. But it's a good short tune that I think does a nice job of just wrapping up the first half of the album and the story.
And so, with all the different genres that make an appearance on side one, were you prepared the first time you heard it for side two? Because somehow it continues to push all the boundaries, and maybe even more so.
No, there was like no way you could be, because like I said, like every song really just has its own kind of vibe. And there's one in particular that I absolutely love on side B, but I mean, there really is like no way to prepare yourself for what's to come. It almost is to the point where I'm just kind of like getting excited as to like what is going to happen, because there really is no way to predict what could come next based on that first disc of just such like, I know I saw somebody somewhere describe this album as genre bending, and I mean, I couldn't think of a better way to describe it, because there really is so many different aspects, all throughout. So,
well, let's try to tackle it, shall we? It opens with a 2-minute spoken word intro called Red Eyes, and it features Ryan Hurst. This was one of the voices that I didn't recognize, but when I knew I had heard it somewhere, and then it hit me pretty quickly once I put two and two together. Do you remember who Ryan Hurst is?
I don't.
Ryan Hurst is probably best known, and he's been in several things, but he's best known for being on Sons of Anarchy as Opie Winston. He also was in Remember the Titans, and he also was on Walking Dead. So you would absolutely know him if you saw him.
Okay. I know who he is now that I saw he was Beta on Walking Dead. Yep.
That's right. And I remember him from The Walking Dead, but I happen to be a big fan of Sons of Anarchy. I thought that was a great show, so I actually liked that character even maybe a little bit more. But really interesting.
He was on another show that I really liked too, Bates Motel. I forgot about that too. He was
nice.
Yep. So
Sons of Saving Private Ryan. He was in. He's got quite the resume. But he was on the Singularity. Kicks off side 2, and this song not only has the spoken word, but really solid orchestration in the background. And then you get to Last Stop, which is kind of the next track here, the next real track. And this song is heavy and has a lot of like upbeat riffage. Very, very liberal use of the low end here. And the verses kind of feature this really slick drum beat. And I believe it's Brendan who sings on this track as well. And he does a phenomenal job of bringing the intensity on this track. And when he sings in a more metal style, he could really front the metal band and you would not blink twice. The chorus is very heavy and reminds me a lot of Strapping Young Lad, if you remember when we covered them in the archives. And so if you're a fan of Devin Townsend and some of his heavier work, check out Last Stop. You're gonna enjoy it. And I just really enjoyed the guitar solo.
I think I had read somewhere that that Bear was a fan of Strapping Young Lad. Can't remember. That
doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's on full display on this tune.
Yeah, for sure. It just kind of that like kind of chaotic, like proggy
frantic,
kind of vibe
proggy,
to it.
But like,
yeah. But with Brendan's vocals, it reminded me a lot of like around the early 2000s when like bands like, Muse were kind of becoming popular. Kind of reminds me of that era, I think. I just can't, whenever I hear Brendan sing, I can't get Muse out of my head for whatever reason.
All right. Well, that's, I hear it, but I feel like he just brings a little more metal on this one. Any other thoughts on this, or you want to move on to Rocco's Basilisk?
Yeah, let's Basilisk it up.
This one is another one which heavily features interesting percussion sounds. It features the vocal stylings of Jens Kidman. And for those that know Meshuggah, Jens Kidman is the vocalist for Meshuggah. And this is another really heavy song with a really, really heavy riff. The intro, though, again, features that percussion sound, and that percussion kind of permeates the rest of the track. But the guitars really make you kind of move to that riff. The verses kind of feature this blend of whispers and harsh vocals from Jens. And then I'd argue that the vocals almost dominate the song in many ways. I really appreciate all the things that are going on this track. It is extremely lush and extremely tight.
Would you say that these last two tracks are probably the heaviest 1-2 punch on the album?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. There's some heavier stuff in spots earlier on, but these two are absolutely brutal and in the best way possible. The
intro, which I will not even begin to guess, like what, if it's just synthesized or whatever, but Nick might appreciate this. It reminded me of Michael Giacchino's Lost soundtrack, like especially like when there were scenes where like they would be discovering something mysterious for the first time, like one of the Dharma hatches or something like that. I don't know. I think he is also somebody that is connected to the USC thing. So I'm wondering if there's any sort of connection there. Nick could probably shed some light on there, but that's what that reminded me of. And then the song just explodes into this, like this really brutal, it's arguably the heaviest track on the album, and the vocals really, I think, are what drive it. But if you're like a real like heavy, you know, especially you like Meshuggah, I mean, this is, I think, the track you might want to check out first, because I think it just has, it's just a really brutal like sound to it. And it does like kind of pull back to that intro sound throughout the song, where kind of in the middle it kind of like start, like it does like a stop and start sort of thing. Cool, like as one would expect from somebody who's a Hollywood composer. There's a lot of like, you know, callbacks and stuff, especially with the, not so much with the like guitars and stuff and the drums, but more so of like the orchestrations and things like that. Much like a movie soundtrack or a TV show soundtrack would do. So, again, that style meshing with metal, I think, is really just working really well. I think this is another one of those tracks where it shines. So yeah, good, really good tune. And then it's, what would come next, I would never have guessed in a million years.
The dichotomy
oh my God,
that last track and the next track, First Day Out, that we're going to talk about, is maybe the craziest transition I've ever heard. Am I lying? I mean, like,
no, it might as well have been from like two completely different albums by two different artists. Like it's wild, but I'll tell you this. This First Day Out might be my second favorite song on the entire album. Because I think that the first of all, the rapper is DJ or Mega Ran, who does video game rap albums, which blows me away. Like, I think I had shared with you, he does an entire hip hop opera based on Symphony of the Night, the Castlevania game. Because I was like really curious if he was like a well-known rapper that I'd heard of before, because I just thought that his rapping was that good. But when you combine that with the electric guitars and the symphonic orchestration, it comes together and just makes this really kick-ass song. So this one was one of the ones one of the early ones that first really stood out to me. But every time I listen to the album, I would look forward to hearing this song, like very, very close to being my song of the week. Definitely my track of disc 2. And I feel like the the orchestrations kind of build more towards the end, to the point where like you get this really almost like magnificent, like just I'm trying to think of triumphant, maybe just like this really really just epic ending, really epic symphonic ending. Just a really cool track. I was so excited to talk to you about this one, just because I know we've talked so little about hip hop on this podcast in the years that we've been doing this, but this song really, really impressed me.
So this is not the first time that these two genres have come together. So I don't want to make it seem like it's never happened before. But the reality is, when you listen to a track like Anthrax's Bring the Noise, it is a clear Anthrax tune with the vocals and the rap stylings that accompany the Anthrax tune. And it's great. I think it's a phenomenal tune. Say what you, some people love it, some people hate it. I think it's great. This is almost a rap where the metal was constructed around it. And it's the antithesis of what the Anthrax track is. It's fascinating. It is this blend of movie score, metal, and mainstream rap, right down to the lyrics. Shockingly, not something that I felt compelled to skip, because in theory, it's just not something I would think I liked, but I liked it. And the singing or the rapping during the chorus is really just alternative or metal, whereas the verses lean more on the traditional rap style. Cool guitar effects round out this tune. This song was, again, just an incredible listen, and I would say go out of your way, if you're not listening to the whole album, to go listen to this one as well, because you've never heard anything like it. Scott
Ian is did contribute to this album, but I don't know like which tracks he had anything to do with. So yeah, there's a couple of people, Kim Thale from Soundgarden too. I'm having a hard time finding where. And Gene Hoglan too, which I guess maybe the strapping young lad thing. I don't know. Yep, and Buck Dharma from Blue Oyster Cult. Like, there, apparently Bear McCreary has stated that there's more than 30 guests on this album across rock, pop, metal, folk, and classical music. But it's hard to find like a track by track breakdown of who's on what. The vocalists are obviously a little bit easier to pick out, but. Yeah, I have to say, I will most definitely be coming back to this song in the future for sure. Just a super, super cool track and just very different. And the first time I heard it, I also was thinking to myself, this is going to make for a very interesting conversation, like you said. Then you get to head to Rage Child, and then all of a sudden we bring in the Red Hot Chili Peppers with that bass line that just jumps out and the percussion behind it. This is, again, Red Hot Chili Peppers, but if they were more metal and less mainstream, I guess. The vocals remind me quite a bit of Rage Against the Machine, and this is the first of two Bear McCreary tracks in a row, but I hear a lot of Rage Against the Machine in the vocals on Rage Child. Then I wonder if that's why they named it such. I'm not kidding when I say that. I wonder if there was a pun in there somewhere. I don't love the verses, not my favorite, but I think the chorus is pretty catchy. I don't love this song. I think there are elements of it that are pretty good, but out of especially the outro, I think it's really good. But this is one of my least favorite songs on both discs. I like the intro because it sounds like a Red Hot Chili Peppers bass line that goes into an Aerosmith guitar riff, nice. Which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you. Like it's a good track. I just didn't love it. I think at this point, I'm kind of really have my ears open for the really out there kind of tracks. And I felt like First Day Out really was like that. And, I mean, more really heavy vocals from Brendan McCreary, and some really enjoyable, solid orchestrations too. But yeah, overall, it's not one of my favorite tracks either. Solid, but, not one of my favorites. I guess they can't all be, fantastic. But again, also it as part of the grander scheme of things, I'm sure that it has its place in both the story and where the song fits musically.
Yeah, I think that's right. I actually prefer the next Brendan McCreary track. It's called Syzygy, and I think I got that right. This is a jazzier number, but not in the jazz lounge style. This is more of like a Coheed and Cambria jazzy type of thing, which I think is fantastic. It's upbeat, it's catchy, it's full of hope and promise, and I feel like I just needed a song like this, especially this week. I didn't have the greatest week. This song, every time I heard it, just uplifted me. The bass, again, really jumps out. It's nice changes of pace throughout the song. It's probably my favorite song thus far on side 2 of the album. And to say nothing of the fact that it's just long enough at 3 minutes. Really good tune.
That bass solo in the middle of the song, just super funky, like reminiscent of so many of those funk metal albums that we've talked about on the podcast thus far. This was like probably at first one of my least favorite songs on the album, but it grew on me as the more I listened to it. Again, Brendan giving me the Muse vibes on this one, but yeah, cool track. I think this is cool. Couple names you might recognize on the next track, though.
The album needed, in my opinion, a strong instrumental tune to just mix it up a little bit. You have a double disc, lots of music. You could do worse than an instrumental tune. And if you're going to do an instrumental tune, why not bring along 2 of the world's greatest guitar players to join you for the ride? So sit back and enjoy a tune which features not just Slash from Guns N' Roses, but Joe Satriani on guitar. Again, the names here speak for itself. This is a wonderful tune with magical orchestration. And somehow, and this is the biggest compliment I can give it, the other instruments that are here somehow stand up to this dual guitar mastery, if you will. So really interesting instrumental track. I like this one.
Another song, I think, with really strong bass work, too.
That's what I'm saying. The other tracks, the other musicians play their part, even though it's clearly a guitar-driven tune because of the guests that are on it.
Yeah, this was apparently originally written by Bear in 1995, and he recorded it here with 2 guitar legends in Satriani and Slash. But yeah, I think it makes for like a good, I don't know if you want to call it a segue at like, almost, or just about 4 minutes and change. But I think because it doesn't have vocals, it has kind of a segue.
Serves that
kind
purpose.
Yeah, it feels that way. It's almost like a palate cleanser in all the best ways, just because it's a really enjoyable. It doesn't feel like it's just a throw in. It feels like it's really meant to accentuate all the instruments involved and kind of let the music, I think, shine while the vocals take a little bit of a rest.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, if we didn't mention it, that's called Escape from the Machines. The next tune is called Rallying Cry, and it features Ivor from the Faroe Islands. This was a name I had heard, but I don't know that I was very familiar with her work. Were you familiar with Ivor the musician?
No, I'm wondering if she's friends with what's his name from Tyr, because I think isn't Tyr from the Faroe Islands as well?
I can't imagine that there's that many people on the island. But no, this is an interesting track. I actually like this one quite a bit. This has an interesting blend of like Orphan Land because of that Middle Eastern flair combined with a Celtic sound or an Icelandic sound or a Faroe Island type of sound. And although I don't understand the lyrics, you can certainly feel the emotion. It's a little bit repetitive, but it's just catchy enough with the melody and that I like it. And you, of course, know that whatever comes next is going to be completely different. So that's Rallying Cry.
It made me think of the band Scald that we saw at Frog Power last year, just because it had a lot of folky elements to it.
It's funny because I felt that way not only about Rallying Cry, but The Last of the Old Gods, the next track. This one has a bit more of like a Norse vibe, not only with the lyrics, but the vocal lines and the instrumentation. This was the one that Scald jumped out to me for sure, but the only difference is they added vocals on top. I thought the brass instruments were really poignant, as were the strings in certain spots. And normally this is not something I would gravitate towards, but it is something I definitely appreciate on this album. So any thoughts on The Last of the Old Gods?
Just again, something a little bit different. This is an Icelandic vocalist, I believe, Sigurjón Jartinsson. I really needed to practice some of these ahead of time.
You'll be able to do the next one, I promise.
I think you're right, though. I think this does have a little bit more of that Scald vibe, where it almost has like just kind of this mid-tempo. You could picture just somebody just like with the giant mallets hitting those big drums or whatever. Very tribal in theme, but with some really good strings too. Like just a really epic kind of song, and I think again like very, very different from anything else we've heard on this album up to this point. But we'll come back to some like traditional sounding metal song with the next track, Leviathan. Your thoughts on Leviathan?
So Leviathan features a musician and a singer that we've not talked about, nor have we talked about his band, yet arguably they're one of the biggest metal bands on the planet. And I'm talking about Corey Taylor, and I'm talking about Slipknot. The orchestration on this tune is next level as far as I'm concerned. Leviathan, especially the beginning, could have easily been in any major motion picture, and you would not have batted an eyelash. The vocals stand out because of how well they're mixed and how good they are. I am not going to profess to be a big Slipknot fan. I've heard maybe a number of tracks that I can count on one hand, but I also know how good of a singer Corey Taylor is, despite me not listening to him as with his band. But I think that he shines on this track. I think the riffs fit the music perfectly, and although it's heavy, it maintains that melody. But the guitars and the vocals steal the show, and it's just a really tight composition.
I really am not familiar with Slipknot, to be honest with you, and I really enjoy the vocals on this track. There's some good screams on here, but in general, it's actually like pretty clean vocals. It's just a really just catchy hard rock kind of tune. It reminded me of like one of those like hard rock bands that made it to the radio, mostly not anything we've talked about on this podcast over the years. This feels like it could have been a single. I'm not sure if it was or not, but I think that this would have been like a good radio tune. But again, like great, still like the orchestrations are still really good here. And again, like I as a fan of just vocalists in general, I really enjoyed hearing all of these different style vocalists, and I think Corey Taylor's vocals really shine here. I think it's a great addition to the party up to this point.
Nice. And we finish up really strong here. We've got 3 tracks left. The next one is Yellow Eyes. This voice was one that I knew who it was the second I heard it. This is another spoken word track with orchestration underneath it. And it features Denai Guerrera, and I think I'm getting that right. But you would probably know her as Michonne from The Walking Dead, and then you'd also know her from the Black Panther series. She has a very distinct voice, and it was cool to hear these guest spots, not with just the musicians, but bringing the whole Hollywood and TV element into the fold. So I thought she did a very nice job. And then you get to the end of Tomorrow. This is the one epic tune on the album. It clocks in at almost 11 minutes. And I nearly made this one my song of the week. It really grabbed me, especially the last few listens. It felt very climactic. It had a ton of elements that made the album great musicality, great vocal lines. And it was almost a mix of like Green Day and metal, which I really, really appreciated. I love this tune. I thought the verses and the chorus were both really good with the chunky guitars, and I liked how it picked up the pacing towards the end. Best song for me on disc 2. I don't think it's a surprise. I love the fact that Slash lends his guitar work for a really bluesy guitar solo and layered vocals at the end. This is a home run track and arguably could have ended the album right there, but for the story. That's how epic this tune is.
Yeah, this is also one of my favorites as well. I will just add a little bit more color to the story part with the previous track, Yellow Eyes. The protagonist at this point is really kind of having a come to Jesus moment, so to speak, with Yellow Eyes, who is kind of the entity that he sees at the end of all of these lifespans, and the spoken word part really just kind of drives home the emotion of that, like, she wasn't an enemy, that like seeing him suffer actually hurt her too. So I thought that like Deny like really added like such a nice flavor to this with her short little spoken word piece there. And then it comes into this final track that the End of Tomorrow, which what's a metal opera without a 10-minute epic track? But again, like Brendan's vocals gives that kind of almost alt rock meets metal kind of vibe. Just it really all the things that make this album great, minus some of the like tribal and folk and hip hop stuff, but like the hard rock elements mixed with the orchestral symphony and orchestrations and things of that nature really come together and make for this really fantastic ending track. Even though there's still one more, it has kind of a sense of finality to it. And then you come to this last track, Tears for the Dead Life, that I think from a story point of view is kind of needed, because it kind of like is almost a reflective track of everything that we've been through the story, both from like a narrative perspective, but also from a musical perspective. It's almost like an epilogue to the entire thing, and ends with, again, some really, really strong guitar solo work, and the vocals, especially at the beginning, are just like really soft and haunting. I think I saw online this track was described as mournful yet cathartic, and I thought that was a really nice way of putting it.
I don't know that it's needed insofar as musically. I thought that the last track could have ended it, but this is a great tune in its own right, and I love the build-up here. It actually winds up becoming a real killer song for me. I should note, Morgan Sorney and Buck Dharma from Blue Oyster Cult are featured on this tune. But I like how about 3 minutes and 40 seconds in, it really picks up. And although it stays a ballad, once the drums and the guitar comes in, it's like you're off to the races as far as a ballad goes. I think part of the reason I like this tune is I hear some Sleep Token vibes on this one, and I thought that was really intriguing. But that really wraps up this journey. And like I said, you had mentioned how we put it off. I don't even know if it was intentional. I think there was just a little bit of trepidation on our part to jump into this, but I'm so glad we did, because I've never heard a piece of music like this in my life. And it's very rare that we finish talking about an album that makes me want to listen to the album again. I've usually kind of said, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm very content not going back to this for some time. Not always, but most of the time, that's how I feel. I don't feel that way with this because A, it's long and there's a lot here, but B, I just think there's a magnificent body of work here, which there's a lot you can sink your teeth into. And I'll be frank, like, as I listen back to this, I think that because of the production and because of all the different types of music going on, the score was just much higher than I ever expected it to be. And also, had I listened to this album 2 years ago, it would have undoubtedly been in my top 50. I think it would have probably been in my top 20 and maybe in the top 10. That's how much I actually enjoyed the album this week. I just didn't know about it.
That was literally what I was going to ask you. If you thought, if you had listened to it in 2024, would it have made your list? I could say for sure it would have been probably in my top 20 at the very least.
Yeah, that's how much I enjoyed it. So I'm going to give it an 8. I don't think it's perfect. There's 1 or 2 tracks I didn't love so much, and there's, maybe a thing here or there I would change, but who am I to say? It's just have the enjoyment I got out of it was an 8, which is really, truly spectacular. And I hope he does another one, right? Like, I hope he does another one. I'm going to read the story as I mentioned earlier, and I just thought it was a fascinating journey through these 2 discs.
Yeah, it's an 8.375 for me. I just it was one of those things where like it just grew and grew and grew each time I listened to it, and then I think reading the novel like really kind of put it over the top. The one thing I did not do that I wish that I had, and maybe still will, is to read each part of the graphic novel while listening to each corresponding track.
Oh, nice.
Especially on headphones, and just completely immerse myself in both audio and visual, and kind of experience it that way. But I have to say, I recommended this album to Knops. Knops has been trying to really keep up with each episode, and he was really, I think, pleasantly surprised by this one. And I look forward to hearing more of his thoughts, and I look forward to hearing more of everyone else's thoughts too. I really hope that everyone gives this a chance. I'll be honest with you, like, if it wasn't for Nick, I don't think I would have even known that this album was released or existed. So
I certainly didn't.
Yeah, thanks to Nick for bringing this to our attention. Thank you for your beautiful words at the beginning, and thank you for your support of this podcast over the years. We will try to get Nick on with us at some point, because I think that his perspective as a composer and fan of metal is it's a really good perspective, and a different perspective than what we have as people, as 2 guys who are not musicians by any right, but talk about musicians quite a bit. So thanks again to Nick, and I think Nick will enjoy next week's selection as well.
So why don't you tell me what that is? We're going to skip the news this week. We're going long. I want to jump to next week. It is your pick. What are we listening to?
Almost 40 years to the day, Metallica released Master of Puppets on March 3rd, 1986, and I gotta say, I was looking through the spreadsheet, and the last time we talked about Metallica was in February of 2024, and it was Saint Anger. So
this will be the palate cleanser we should have done 2 years ago. I'll tell you something funny. Had you not picked it, I was picking it the next week. So you say, now I got to pick something else.
I had a feeling that you were going to, but I wanted to pick it just so it would be closer to the actual anniversary date. Yep. And it really is just an album that is on our, like, that list of albums that we have to talk about at some point.
And the time is certainly no better than now. So this is going to be a fun one. We revisit an all-time classic next week. I'm curious how it holds up, and I say that because I'm just so familiar with these songs at this point. I can probably talk to you about the album now, but at the same time, I don't know that the last time I listened to the entire thing straight through. I've heard a lot of tracks, and I've gone back to go listen to Disposable Heroes or Battery, but I don't know that the last time I've listened to the entire album, like start to finish.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I have a Metal Exchange playlist, and this album would come on. Battery would start playing as soon as the Bear McCreary album ended, and boy, the production change is jarring to go from this absolutely beautifully polished 2024 release to like this raw as hell 1986 metal album. So yeah, looking forward to next week's chat about Metallica's Master of Puppets album. And yeah, that's about it from us. So take care, and I'll see you next week.